Welcome to the Guide to Wellness podcast. I'm your host, Susannah Freeman, licensed acupuncturist. In these conversations, we blend the wisdom of traditional Chinese medicine with the innovations of modern functional medicine, offering practical insights and tools for a life of wellness. Our vision is to contribute to a healthier world by providing accessible knowledge, tools, and daily practices. If you're ready to adopt new health habits and do things differently, then listen and learn here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Guide to Wellness podcast. I'm Susannah Freeman, Clinic Director at Great Turning Healing Center and Guide to Wellness. And with me today is Jack Schwem, our fabulous acupuncturist here at Great Turning Healing Center. Today we're going to be talking about all things acupuncture. What do you need to know? What is it like? How do you use acupuncture? Things you need to be aware of, cautions, and how can it benefit your world, your life? So stay tuned. Here we go.
Howdy, everyone.
Jack, last month you and I talked about intermittent fasting. So everyone, I hope you tune into that and listen to fasting. Today we're taking on a different subject, something very near and dear to our hearts. And this too, like fasting, is another ancient health practice that goes back thousands of years and has been used all over the globe and has an unbroken lineage, which is one of the beauties of our profession, that we can look back 2,000 years, 1,000 years, 50 years, and know what the scholars and the clinicians were saying during those times, and it can be really helpful bringing that into our modern world. So there's lots of old and new in our acupuncture practice that keeps us in touch with modern research and also grounded in old classical traditions.
Indeed.
Pretty cool, huh? We've had lots of interesting conversations about the history of acupuncture. Jack, I'm wondering if you can give our listeners just a short version of this history, given that it's so long. Give us your take on the history of acupuncture, please.
So I think the first thing to do when you're approaching the history of acupuncture is kind of get some sense of the time depth, because, like you said, the oldest written accounts are just over 2,000 years.
Wow.
But the archaeological evidence for acupuncture stretches about 1,000 years before that, which puts it quite a good long time ago that there's solid documented evidence for something like what we do.
Yes.
And of course, 3,000 years ago, the tools looked quite different. The archaeological evidence that we do have is healer's bags from ancient China, prehistoric China, with bone needles and stone needles and all of these cutting and manipulating implements that they could make with the technologies that they had.
I've always wondered about this, and this is not something we have prepped this conversation, but were the ancient peoples living in China that rugged that they could handle those needles inserting their skin, or were they using more for stimulation on the surface and more massage and heat and pressure?
We don't really know.
Right. Were they that tough? Maybe not as calming and relaxing.
Maybe
and
not as calming and relaxing
experiences we have now.
But it persisted.
Yes, it did.
The coolest.
There's something about it that kept working.
For sure.
Okay.
And the coolest piece of, certainly not hard evidence, but an interesting anecdote in the archaeology related to acupuncture is, have you heard of Utsi the Iceman?
Yep.
Right. Like Stone Age European mummy found in a alpine glacier.
Right.
And he has tattoos, some of which are more symbolic and some of which are just little dots.
Right.
And he has a number of little dots on his leg that baffled the archaeologists for a long time. One day, an acupuncturist saw photos of these dots and were like, this might be nothing, but this is where I would needle someone with gallstone pain.
Right.
And they were like, well, that's kind of interesting. Marked it down for later. Sometime later, they do an MRI of this mummy, and he's got gallstones.
Is that so?
Yep. So this certainly doesn't. It's not solid evidence that our tradition could be tens of thousands of years old, but it could be. So back to the better documented part
Very
of our
interesting.
history. The oldest canon of acupuncture is obviously a syncretic text. So it was assembled from a number of folk traditions that were alive and presumably old at the time around China, but this was an imperial collection of what the powers that be deemed to be the appropriate uses of acupuncture, Chinese herbalism, scraping, cupping, what have you. And this is the Huangdi Neijing.
So the text is the Huangdi Neijing, and it describes the use of needles to penetrate the skin, but also to stimulate with acupressure on the skin.
Indeed.
Gua sha is the scraping technique that's used throughout the world now, and also cupping, which is used all over the world, gaining a lot of momentum. So these are other tools that we use that do not actually involve needles, correct?
Yeah.
And then there's moxa, which is warming the skin by burning an herb. And don't worry, folks, we don't burn you, we burn the herb. It doesn't actually ever flame. It's actually quite safe and quite lovely. Okay, so now, what about your training, Jack, and how do you use acupuncture in your daily practice? Tell us about that, please.
So, in the intervening 2,000 years since the Huangdi Neijing arose, that tradition fractures and comes back together and turns into many, many different lineages. The lineage that the American boards are based off of, and every acupuncturist in the world basically is trained, at least as kind of a fundamental cornerstone, is what's called traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, which is like the semi-mythical Huangdi did 2,000 plus years ago. The communist government in China codified the various traditions of acupuncture that were alive 100 years ago. And that became the communist canon of Chinese medicine, and that goes around the world after physicians from the West watch open heart surgeries that are performed with local anesthetic in the chest and acupuncture for the calming of the patient.
Right. So that's one of the principal ways that acupuncture came to the U.S. was with
some
that
really
witnessing.
impressive.
Yes. And so now what you're saying is that we have this standard of care.
Yeah.
And we have some consistency in training and credentialing and licensure and a scope of practice that has lots of protocols.
Indeed.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons why traditional Chinese medicine in its various forms is better accepted than other traditional modes of medicine, is the for all of its many pros and cons, the Western scientific orientation of the communist government in China gave it a veneer that was more acceptable to Western health practices. Anyway.
And then your particular training, where did you go to school?
So I went to school at Northwestern Health Sciences, which is, it started as a chiropractic college, and they expanded into massage and acupuncture and radiation technology. So my foundation is very much in that Chinese American style of TCM.
Got it. And what I see you doing, Jack, on a daily basis is adapting your training and your tools to the patient who walks in the door.
For sure. I think that's one of the coolest parts about the variety of techniques that we have from a 3,000-year-old lineage is you can use metaphors and techniques and technologies that adapt to all sorts of different things that walk through your door, and different ways of thinking that your patients have, different ways of expressing their symptoms. It's very neat.
Yeah, and I notice how your training and my training, even though we work together every day, we're going to use a different strategy with the same patient often. Sometimes we'll use the same strategy.
For sure.
Sometimes I'm going to use my training that looks a little different than yours, but we're still getting to the same place.
Indeed.
Yeah, it is. And
how about you? What are like kind of the
Yeah,
lineages
so-
that you draw on?
So I come from a background in both nutrition and massage therapy. And then I also was trained at the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine in traditional Chinese medicine. Since then, I have studied quite a bit in a more Japanese lineage that I find to be, for my style, works really, really well with modern applications, with autoimmunity or stress or fatigue or illness, and for pain. So I wind up using a combination of traditional Chinese medicine techniques, and then I add this Japanese lineage that I've been trained in.
And if you go to any acupuncturist, they'll give you a blend of things. Like I said, the boards are very much oriented to that traditional Chinese medicine, but because of the diaspora of various lineages, there's French Vietnamese style practitioners and Japanese and Korean and more esoteric Chinese styles and Western interpretations, entirely biomedical styles.
Right. Kind of reminds me of other artists and also medical doctors, right? We all start with a basic training, and then we start to add our own unique flair, right? And what I love that when I hear you say this, that you treat the patient who walks in the door. And so you're going to use your scope of practice, you're going to use your training, you're going to stay within your lane, if you will, as an acupuncturist. And then you're going to adapt based on what that person needs in that moment.
For sure.
Which is super cool that we have that flexibility.
Indeed.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to get to is as close as possible to the root cause of their stress, illness, pain, whatever their issue is. We're trying to get to the bottom of it so that we can create a full resolution, whatever that means.
Great ancient metaphors that we get in our lineage is treating the root and the branch. And that is, someone's going to come in with symptoms. You have to look at all of their signs and symptoms. But you can't just play whack-a-mole with signs and symptoms.
Right.
You have to look at what's underneath that pattern of presentation and get to the root of things so you can address the branch, the symptoms, the thing that is they're complaining about, the thing that's interrupting their life, but also get to some of that deeper level and hopefully and usually prevent that symptom or other symptoms from popping up later on.
And we may swing back to this topic later, but one of the things that I think that you and I do well in our clinic in getting to that root cause is that we'll start off and we'll treat the branch. And that may be acupuncture, that usually is acupuncture is where we start. But in order to get that full resolution, we might also wind up doing postural reeducation, therapeutic exercises that might mean a referral to a therapist or a physical therapist, that might mean a referral back to their medical doctor for more imaging or testing, or so we can understand what that root cause is from a lab's diagnostic perspective. We may look at the diet. We may look at sleep patterns. We may be using Chinese herbs, right? So we're going to start to draw on the other tools in Chinese medicine that include herbal medicine nutrition, therapeutic exercise, lifestyle, spiritual well-being, in addition to the acupuncture, and we're going to use the right tool for the job.
For sure.
But the topic of today's episode is acupuncture.
Indeed. And I think that's another thing to be aware of, whether you're coming to us or going to another acupuncturist, is their network that they're embedded in and their willingness and facility with getting you referred to the right practitioners for that root cause. Because I'm a firm believer that everybody can be helped by acupuncture.
Indeed.
And acupuncture isn't the perfect thing for everything.
Yeah, well said. Yep. And that's not to toot our own horn too much, but I will say we are very collaborative.
Indeed.
And I believe that that is part of what gives us great clinical results, is because we're willing to refer somebody out if we feel like we're not getting the full root cause addressed. And sometimes people come to us because they are not getting the root cause addressed somewhere else.
Certainly. Like with acupuncturists, other practitioners, there's a wide range of skill and inclination in how they do things. And having practitioners you trust refer you to practitioners they trust is a huge advantage in getting good results.
Indeed.
From any modality.
Yeah. Well said, once again.
Anyway, back to...
So there's the skill of the practitioner. There's the diagnosis that I think a lot of our patients, when they're new to acupuncture, don't really understand just how much we are diagnosing their underlying pattern, their root cause, as they just think they're hanging out on the table and we're feeling their pulses for the rate of the heart rate, and there is so much more that we're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about your diagnostic process? And there's both subjective and objective measures that you are looking at.
Certainly. So on the subjective side of things, one of the common experiences that people have the first time they see an acupuncturist is they're like, I have knee pain. Why are you asking me all of these other questions about my sleep, about my diet, about my food cravings, and if I have headaches? Like, please just stick needles in my knee. And that is because sometimes you do just need needles in your knee.
Yep.
But often the knee is part of the rest of your body, and often things in the rest of your body are impacting your ability to heal. If you're seeing an acupuncturist for a tweaked knee, you've either seen an acupuncturist before or it's going on longer than you want it to for whatever reason. And whether that's because of gut dysbiosis or an immune thing going on or whatever, we want
inflammation, fatigue, stress.
Yeah, we want to get to that deeper level, into that root.
Great. Cool.
So that's why we're asking all these other questions. That's why we're examining the pulse more carefully than just counting how many beats per minute.
Right. And the pulse is a long-standing tradition.
Across Eurasia.
Yes. And there's much more to it than just the heart rate and the regularity, although we are checking that just like a nurse or a doctor would.
Certainly.
And we're referring you if that rate or regularity is at all abnormal.
Problematic.
Yes. And then we're looking, we believe, at the heart sounds. We're feeling the heart sounds the heart sounds are then, we believe, in the modern biomedical explanation of the pulse reading, you're listening, feeling for the heart sounds in the radial artery that then reflect the circulation and the tissue status in the organs. Fascinating, isn't it?
Very cool.
And in my 30 years of feeling people's pulses, I have come to trust it. And sometimes I'll tell people, this is what I'm feeling, and they'll just nod their heads, right? Like, yep, that's exactly what's happening internally.
Yep.
It's pretty amazing. And so what if somebody is not being straight up with you, or what if somebody's not able to tell you what's going on and they just say, I don't know, or maybe they don't have the cognitive ability.
Or even just that like internal awareness to finally differentiate things or express things in a way that makes sense to the practitioner. So in Chinese medicine, we have lots of specific terms for different kinds of pain, which English is more or less well equipped to handle. But one of my classmates is bilingual and was translating for a Spanish-speaking patient, and she realized how much more difficult it is to delineate subtle types of pain, at least with her level of Spanish speaking, which was pretty good. Like, she was, to my ears, fluent. And so there's all sorts of things that can get in between the sign or symptom in the patient to their mind, to their expression, to your interpretation, to your diagnosis. And at a certain level, you take what you can of the subjective data in as high of quality as you can get from them, and you add that to the objective data, you formulate a hypothetical diagnosis, you treat based on that, and if it doesn't work, then you have to examine, where did we go wrong? What did we miss? Why is this not doing what I think it will?
Well, this sounds a lot like what would happen in any medical clinic around the world.
It is.
So there's the diagnostic protocols that we use and use as much objectivity as we can. And at the end of the day, it's also up to the clinician's interpretation and their experience, their clinical judgment.
Certainly.
You're reminding me of my 2-year-old patient who came in for a new patient exam yesterday with her mom. And judging by how she responded and what mom said to me later, I think we actually got a pretty close diagnosis to what's going on with her. And she clearly was not able to tell us in words what she was feeling.
For sure.
It still worked.
Yep.
That was cool.
Very cool.
So tell us more. How many needles might you use in any one treatment, and what would a treatment look like if a patient comes to see you?
So how many needles is going to vary very widely by practitioner. Most of my treatments end up in the 20-ish needle range.
That kind of sounds like a lot. Do they hurt?
They don't hurt, mostly. They are a needle. They're coming through your skin. You're going to feel a little something as they go through most of the time. Every once in a while, it might hurt a little bit more, but we want this to be a comfortable experience, so we're going to move and adjust or even remove a point if it is more uncomfortable than you're able to relax.
So if I'm laying there and something feels a little uncomfortable or I have some momentary pain, I'm going to tell you, or you might be able to watch my face and see that, ooh, geez, that might have hurt a little, and you're going to immediately adjust it.
Yeah, or check in.
Yes.
Was that momentary?
Yes.
Was that electric sensation, or was it stingy, achy? How was that uncomfortable? Because if it's this kind of big, achy, heavy feeling, we had a patient earlier this week describe it like rocks in her head. That can be what we're looking for depending on the kind of needling that we're doing.
Right.
Back to the Huangdi Jing, that oldest book that we have surviving, they say a whole bunch of times. I had a professor who would say, they say no less than 47 times in the Huangdi Jing, if you're not getting De Qi, you're not doing acupuncture.
So De Qi is a response from the body.
Yes.
Correct.
That feeling of rocks in your head. Not necessarily, but
that sounds kind of heavy, but what you mean is a sense
swollen,
of dullness,
achy, sometimes heavy feeling
and that may
around
be
the needle.
Because there were muscles in the base of the base of the head where the head meets the neck that were relaxing, actually.
Indeed.
And the needles were actually working on that muscle tension to allow it to relax.
Yep.
But there, in the meantime, was a sense of pressure.
Yeah.
Right? And that's productive.
Because, interestingly, interestingly, the body doesn't have pain receptors past a certain depth in the tissue.
Right.
Because most of our sensations need to be concerned with what we're touching, not what is coming deep into our body. So the sensation receptors you have in those deeper muscle layers are stretch receptors for those motor reflexes, and that's what we're triggering when we get that qi response.
Right. So a sense of achiness, pressure, or a dull ache, that is not being experienced as stress or pain.
Indeed.
It's just sensation. Is this Chinese word de qi? We can also just call it sensation, and that's when you know something's happening.
Indeed. One of the indications that something's happening, because some people don't get any of that.
Right. And what I find sometimes is I'll put a pin in somewhere else with the target. We'll talk more about this in a minute, but let's say I put a pin in the ankle to reduce the top of the shoulder, which we can do, folks. And they might not feel it in the ankle, but then we go back and we check the tension in the shoulder again, and that's dramatically better. So in that case, maybe they felt the pin in the ankle, maybe not. But they definitely had a response in the body elsewhere.
For sure.
Right? So we use that a lot too. So you don't always have to feel it, but we want the body to respond.
Indeed.
Okay, cool. So give us an example, Jack. Like, for example, we've had a lot of these cases recently, and it's a good one to talk about. What if I have a headache? What are you going to do for me? I'm like, man, I have this headache, Jack. Make it go away.
We have great results with headaches most of the time. Every once in a while, somebody will have a headache pattern that stumps us. But for the most part, headaches are very easy to get good results with.
And a reminder, if we're stumped, we're going to refer you out.
Indeed.
And get more information.
But lots of things cause a headache.
Like what?
The old example of when you were a kid and you said, "Mom, I have a headache." Probably her first suggestion was, have you drank enough water? Because dehydration can cause headaches.
Yeah.
But a lot of other things can cause headaches with or without dehydration. Posture, illness, trauma and injury to the head and neck, how you've been sleeping, what your stress levels are, how your hormone balance is, the meridian flow from our traditional metaphors, whether you believe in that or not.
It's still a thing.
It seems to work anyway. How your diet is, the food toxins, how your guts are handling even non-toxic food or what might be non-toxic to someone else.
Cool. So just to sum that up, there are a lot of reasons or causes of headaches, and our job is to accurately differentiate and diagnose the root cause of that headache, and to use the right tool for the job, the right treatment to address the branch, which is the pain in your head.
Indeed.
Okay, and so we may be using different tools from our tool belt in addition to acupuncture. So we might be using Chinese herbs or herbs from around Asia and the West. We might be adjusting diet and nutrition. We might be using the cupping that we talked about earlier, the gua sha, massage. We might be using moxa. But the acupuncture is going to be one of our primary tools.
For sure.
Cool.
And when it comes to headaches, the first place I'm going to look is kind of that meridian theory approach, because I get good results with it.
Yes, we do, don't we?
Not with everyone. My wife, who's been on the podcast, is a great example of she has recurring headaches, and the meridian theory treatment that I do for most people who walk in with headache, that gets rid of headaches and migraines for most people who get on the table, doesn't work for her. So we've found other ways.
She's your teacher.
Aren't we all?
And then there's also this concept of trigger points. Can you talk about that a little bit? What if, like, I'm aware that trigger points, and we need to define that term, in the trapezius or up into the front of the neck can often refer pain up into the head and create a headache, right?
So trigger points as a concept are any point that refers pain. So you're noticing pain one place because of either a practitioner pressing on or some sort of problem in the tissue somewhere else.
So you might not know where the trigger point is. You know where the pain is, but you don't know what's the root cause of that pain.
Exactly. Even if it's just a couple of inches away, you can always be massaging. It really hurts behind my left deltoid. Why does it always hurt here? I keep massaging it and nothing gets better. And it turns out that it's, on your scapula, under your scapula, something just a few inches away that you're never going to get to if you're not looking
not
for
a trained
trigger points.
Practitioner. Yep, that's a good example. We see that a lot. Pain partway down the upper arm is usually coming from the scapula or the shoulder joint itself.
Yep. Or shoulder girdle somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. So trigger points are these, they get talked about a lot in Chinese history, Chinese acupuncture history. They're called Ashur points, which means tender or painful point. So there's this whole map of the body. Acupuncturists have been treating trigger points forever. We don't always use that term, but it's a good term in the West because people know it, and but that is something that we're doing quite a bit to use, like you said, the channel theory first to open the whole system, relax the whole pathway that's leading to that pain, and then once the whole channel has relaxed a little, then you can go into the trigger point, and it's pretty easy to release it.
Indeed.
Cool. And then maybe you'll give people some exercises or some homework to maintain that postural change that you just created.
For sure. Or that enhanced mobility or stabilize the flexibility that they already have and is causing problems because of hyperflexibility.
Right.
The term hypermobility gets used more often, but I don't like it. So
hyperflexibility works too. So one of the things that I call it my silly human party trick, when somebody has, I bet all you listeners know this, at the top of the shoulder, there's in the trapezius muscle, there's this spot that tends to be tight on a lot of people, especially if you work at a desk or drive a lot and your shoulders are rolled forward a little bit. And it can be quite stiff and tight and sore and problematic, and it often leads to a headache. You know the spot I mean?
Indeed.
Okay. So sometimes we have patients who are very, very thin. They might have asthma. They might have reason to have an enlarged lung. Or they might just be very, very thin. And you and I, because of our training, are very well aware of where those lungs are. And there are some of my patients who have this trapezius tension and headaches. I don't want to put a needle anywhere near their lungs because I don't want to cause a pneumothorax, which is a collapsed lung, because I'm being very careful and using my experience and my training. So I'm going to go down to the wrists and the ankles. And there's this spot just above the inner ankle, about a hand width up, but really you go to where the patient tells you it's tender, and you stick a pin in there, and it's perfectly safe. And then you go back to that spot on top of the shoulder a minute later and ask the patient how it feels and check it yourself. And lo and behold, 90% of the time you'll find that trapezius muscle and the muscles underneath have dramatically relaxed. It's very fun.
Indeed.
So that's where we're using channel theory. There is an explanation in acupuncture theory and meridian or channel theory as to how and why that point in the ankle can relax the trapezius. but it's not explained by nerves.
Not yet, anyway.
Right, but we use it every day. So that's an example of how we're going to use the channel theory to release the broader area where at the source of the pain, and then we'll go in if it's practical and a good idea for that patient and do some actual trigger point work. Yeah, cool. People often go to sleep and deeply relax during their treatments.
For sure.
So how does that work?
How it works, I don't exactly know, but there's a great example of how well it works. There was an EEG study done, I think in China, it might have been Japan. I should actually dig this up again, but I did read it in school. The study was on meditation, not specifically on acupuncture, but one of the test groups was getting acupuncture. So they took a bunch of master meditators, Buddhists and Taoist monks and nuns, and did EEGs of their brainwaves when they were deep in meditation. And then they did a bunch of other control groups or test groups of regular people off the street getting different things that might simulate meditation. So meditation instruction and leaving them to quiet sit, guided meditations, getting a massage, doing more of a moving meditation, yoga sort of thing, and getting acupuncture. And of those different things, most of them changed brainwaves to some degree or another, but the acupuncture was the closest to the master meditators' brainwaves for regular people.
Cool.
So I tell people they get their 30 minutes of being a master meditator every week.
I love it. You know, if you've been listening to these podcasts for a while, you'll hear me talk about my Uncle Walter, who is no longer with us. And he was a famous, well-known neurobiologist in his field, and he worked with the Chinese to model the brain, so Chinese researchers. And so he and I would have long conversations about acupuncture.
Very cool.
And long conversations about the brain and the nervous system. And he's the one who taught me about ketosis that I mentioned to you in the our last episode. And in this case, because he was so closely working with Chinese researchers on modeling the brain, I asked him about acupuncture, and he actually had the same answer, which is, we don't entirely know yet, but we know pieces of it. And all of those pieces of it scientifically have been documented and proven. And he said there is no, and he's about as Western-minded a scientist as you could get. He's like, there is no question that acupuncture works. We simply can't fully explain it yet.
For sure.
So that's from the neurobiologist perspective, and that's certainly been my experience.
So next time you go on Wikipedia and they try to tell you acupuncture is a pseudoscience, just shake your head and say, yeah, sure, whatever, Wikipedia.
Well, it's because we can't explain it fully in our Western scientific model. This thing called qi is a very difficult to define term, and there's lots and lots of theories. You and I, at the end of the day, are clinicians. We can talk till the cows come home about what all those different theories are, how that cellular signaling is happening in the body. Is it going through fascia? It's not just going through the nerves, but you're feeling it, and therefore the nervous system is involved.
For sure.
It's going through fluids. Is it a biochemical response? Is it electrical, right? So this is where...
Some of all of the above,
yes.
Most likely.
So at the end of the day, acupuncture helps people restore the sense of balance in their body. It helps restore well-being. I like to say that acupuncture and Chinese medicine and functional medicine help remind the body what it already knows how to do, which is to be healthy.
I'm a firm believer that the body heals, the physician helps.
Right. And like any other medicine, it doesn't work for everybody or everything, but it does work. And it's always going to reduce stress and pain and inflammation.
For sure.
And restore homeostasis.
And who doesn't need less stress, less pain, and less inflammation?
Is there any reason why somebody would seek out acupuncture over another treatment, for example, a physical therapist or their doctor?
I think the reasons that people do seek out acupuncture, at least from our clinical experiences, either they've tried a number of other things and haven't gotten results, and they come to us and quite often do get results. And then, after having that experience once or twice, or their friend, their neighbor, whoever had that experience, then they might come to us earlier, get more preventative care from an acupuncturist, get more referrals from an acupuncturist when we're like, hey, this is a problem we think so-and-so could help you with better.
Gotcha.
And I think that's often the arc that people end up in, because it isn't most people's first thought if they haven't had acupuncture before, but it becomes people's first thought after they've had a good result with acupuncture.
And then they'll say, hey, you helped me with this, but now I have this thing, or my husband, wife, kid
or
has...
even you're halfway through a treatment plan,
Right.
and they're like, I feel so much better in this area. Right. Can we start working on this now? And you're like, well, maybe, but I don't want to backslide on what we've just been spending a month working on.
So that goes back to the root and the branch again.
Indeed.
And always keeping an eye on that root cause in somebody's life history, so they can, at the end of the day, be healthier and happier and have more well-being. And we can't always fully resolve that problem. If you have arthritis, I'm not going to be able to change the structure of your bones. But can I help you with joint space and fluid and inflammation and mobility? Absolutely. If you have type 1 diabetes, I'm not going to be reversing that, but can I help you possibly need less insulin and have more prevention along the way, so that you're less likely to have long-term consequences?
And there are some great practitioners helping type 1 diabetics function at a super high level.
And we do too.
Yep. But we can also get you those resources in addition to helping you in the way that we help you.
And we absolutely can help you prevent type 2 diabetes.
For sure.
And help you with that, right? So there's lots of, if you catch it early, we can work on prevention. If you've already got it, we're going to do our best, and we're going to help you along the way. And there's always more well-being to be had. So this is our specialty, using these clinical diagnostic skills, both traditional and modern, to assess and treat you with all the tools at our disposal. First and foremost, if you're coming in person, it's acupuncture, and then we're going to spin off into herbs and nutrition and whatever else is needed to help you regain your health. Anything else you want to share with folks?
I don't think so. Go get an acupuncture appointment if you've never had it, or even if you have and it's been a minute.
Yeah. So if you're outside our easy local area, give us a call. We'll help you find a referral in your hometown. And you know how to reach us here. Check the show notes. You can always reach us on the web at www.guidetowellness.com. And also the actual clinic is www.greatturninghealing.com. Sure appreciate you all listening. Now you have a lot more insight into the mysterious and wonderful world of acupuncture, and we hope to see you in the clinic soon. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you. Bye.